Today, the island of Corsica is an integral part of France and has been for over 2 centuries. However, historically, Corsica was inhabited by people who were more similar to modern Italians than the French. So then, how did France get the island? Why did the Corsican people tolerate their rule? And why has Corsica not become independent or a part of Italy? Well, somewhat ironically, Corsica's fall to France came about as the Corsicans were attempting to gain their freedom from another Italian power, the Republic of Genoa, which had maintained intermittent control on the island since the late 13th century. By the 1700s, Corsicans had begun to develop an identity of their own, distinct from the Genoese. At that point, Italy, as we know it today, wasn't yet a country, and instead the peninsula was divided up into a handful of Italian states, of which Genoa was one, and the Corsicans essentially wanted to have their own. Naturally, though, the Genoese weren't overly happy about that idea, so they repressed Corsican separatism in the 1720s and 30s. But all of that cost money, and the Genoese were running out of it, as well as presumably patience, fast. The final straw came in 1755, when the Corsican revolutionaries got a decent leader, in the form of Pascal Paoli. Paoli succeeded where earlier rebels, including his own father, had failed, and he drove Genoa from almost the entire island. Only the fortified coastal cities of Calvi and Bonifacio remained in Genoese hands. Through Paoli's leadership, the Republic of Corsica was proclaimed, with him as president. The Republic's constitution was written in Tuscan Italian, the same language that modern Standard Italian was built off of, and it embodied the liberal principles of the Enlightenment. Under Paoli, Corsica's justice system was modernized, its economy, especially the mining sector, was built up, and schooling was prioritized. He even founded the island's only university. Though while the Republic of Corsica was effectively independent, the Genoese still did claim it. That was until 1768, when through the Treaty of Versailles, not the famous one, they sold the island to France. Unlike Corsican republicanism, the absolute monarchy in France was just about the least liberal system in Europe. So Paoli and the Corsicans endeavoured to resist the French, who had taken up residence in the old Genoese fortresses on the coast. And at first, to the surprise of France's King Louis XV, and certainly to his commanders on the ground, the Corsicans held them off and won the Battle of Borgo. Their luck would soon fade, though, and a new French commander, the Comte de Vue, forced Paoli out after his victory at the Battle of Pont Novo in May 1769. Corte, the Corsican capital, was taken by the French, and the Corsican Republic was history, though the dream of a Franceless Corsica wasn't. For the next 20 years, Paoli lived in exile in London, where he ingratiated himself with Britain's elites. That was until events in Paris made Corsican independence look possible again. The French Revolution turned a social order in France that had lasted for centuries completely on its head. So when King Louis XVI lost his, and the new French Republic became at war with most of Europe, Paoli returned to Corsica. The Corsicans, only too happy to see him back, called an assembly at Corte to consider secession from France. For arranging that, Paoli was denounced by his fellow Corsican, the young Napoleon Bonaparte, in front of the French National Assembly. But at Corte, once more, Corsican independence was declared. However, this time they would not create a republic, though Paoli most likely wanted to. Instead, the Corsicans were pragmatic, and utilizing his connections in London, they petitioned for aid from Britain. The British were already a participant in the War of the First Coalition against the new French Republic, though unlike their major allies, Prussia and Austria, they had not been able to launch any significant invasion of the French mainland. British power primarily existed at sea, and they had already lost the port of Toulon to the revolutionaries, which made the idea of having a large island base near the French Mediterranean coast tempting. So a fleet under Admiral Samuel Hood was dispatched to reinforce the Corsican rebels in 1794, and together, as the British could essentially blockade the entire island, they drove the French out. Side note, Samuel Hood was the namesake for the British battlecruiser HMS Hood, which infamously was sunk by the German Bismarck during World War II. Also, it was during the fighting to secure Calvi that then Captain, later Admiral Horatio Nelson, lost his right eye. So Corsica, using the Kingdom of Ireland as a model, it was technically distinct from Britain, but the British monarch sat on the throne of both countries, became the Anglo-Corsican Kingdom, and George III of Great Britain was crowned as its first, and only, king. Obviously, though, he never travelled there, given that there was a war going on, so a Scottish Viceroy, Sir Gilbert Elliot, was appointed to perform the king's duties, which, to be honest, weren't particularly extensive. Much like Britain itself, the Anglo-Corsican Kingdom was a democratic state, for the standards of the time anyway. It had a unicameral, elected parliament as a legislature, and a council of state headed by a prime minister as its executive. Probably to his disappointment, Paoli did not serve in that role, rather it went to Carlo Andrea Pozzo di Borgo, another prominent Corsican. But the alliance between Corsican and Brit was only ever one of convenience. The kingdom's motto, friends and not by mere accident, makes that clear. Paoli, while not officially in charge, was still incredibly influential on the island, and he didn't hide the fact that he preferred republicanism to monarchy. In short, the Corsicans gave Britain a bit of a headache. So when Spain entered the war of the First Coalition on France's side, Britain accepted that its position in the Mediterranean would have to change. With Spain's help, France could potentially stand up to the British at sea. So they abandoned Corsica, the French came back, they forced both Paoli and de Borgo into exile, and Corsica became two French departments. And that mostly settled the question of Corsican sovereignty for the next century. There were still plenty of Corsicans who wished to see their republic arise again, but from now on they would go about attempting to accomplish that primarily through politics, not war. Throughout the 19th century, various French regimes attempted to assimilate the Corsicans, but resistance and attempts to preserve Corsican culture didn't really begin in earnest until the aftermath of World War I. During the war, Corsica had the highest ratio of deaths per capita out of any French region, mostly due to high rates of conscription on the island. The slaughter led to widespread distrust of the French government and growing calls for autonomy for Corsica. It didn't help that Italy had unified in the 1860s, and now its fascist government was eager to try to reclaim what it viewed as historically Italian territories, like Corsica. In 1923, the island's first regionalist party, the Party of Corsican Action, was founded by a politician and writer, Petru Rocca. Like many Corsican nationalists, he first advocated for more power to be given to a Corsican local government within France, but in the 1930s moved to support Corsican unification with Italy. Though when Mussolini made it clear that that would not have been a union of equals, most nationalists backed off that position. So during World War II, he took Corsica the hard way, and the island was occupied by fascist Italy. Unfortunately, for them, Italy lost the war, and their occupation wasn't particularly popular, so in the decades since, Corsica, being a part of France, has more or less been accepted by the population. A notable exception was the National Liberation Front of Corsica, a terror group that operated from 1976 until 2012, and which sought total Corsican separation from France. Their tactics were condemned by most Corsicans. The old French goal of assimilation has, by now, largely been successful. Corsicans almost all speak French, and many don't even speak Corsican at all. However, in their assembly, as of this video's publishing anyway, parties that support further Corsican autonomy do hold a majority, and there definitely remains a small portion of the Corsican population that favours outright independence. Italian cultural influence has dwindled since 1768, the Italian state no longer claims Corsica, and it will likely stay a part of France well into the foreseeable future. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell below to ensure that you don't miss the next one. In the video to the left, you can find out why the Pope still owns a bit of Rome, and as always, I've been James, and thank you for watching Look Back History.